You've waited long enough. You want to try out a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Perhaps you've seen Critical Role on YouTube or Stranger Things on Netflix. Maybe you've seen the movie Dungeons and Dragons. It's about Dungeons and Dragons. Doesn't matter. You want to play. You want to play a simple pick-up game of Dungeons and Dragons. How hard could it be? If you're playing something else like basketball, all you'd need for a pick-up game is a ball and a space and a place to play it. All right? That's simple. And you can say the same thing about floor hockey or football or that other football. They just require the ball and the space. And then you're off. The good news is, for people who want to play Dungeons and Dragons, the ball is basically a dice. You roll this dice and it determines your success or not on almost anything that you try. This has been really simplified for 5th edition. For the person who goes first at doing something, that's called initiative. You roll that dice and you add some ability to it. In this case, almost always dexterity. It means how quick you are. Makes sense that the quickest gets to go first. If you want to hit somebody or hurt somebody, once again, if you want to hit somebody, you take this dice and you add the appropriate ability. Usually it's strength if you want to hit somebody hard, but if you want to hit somebody accurately and carefully, then it's this dexterity again, just like for rolling initiative. And this goes for almost anything that you do. You also add skill to things that you have skill in. How many numbers could that be? Obviously, you're more skilled at some things than other things. Not so with 5th edition. If you have the skill, you add your skill number. If you don't have the skill, you don't add it. It's that simple. For players, playing a pickup game just involves rolling that 20-sided dice over and over and adding these two things. One appropriate ability, your skill modifier, if you have skill in that. And that's it. How simple could it be? You might have figured out that if you want to play a pickup game, you also need a referee. But in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, now this is a bit bizarre. The space exists in the mind of your referee. That's right. The dungeon master, the game master, your referee, the entire world is in his mind. Isn't that odd? If you're going to play Risk or Monopoly or any other game, chess, snakes and ladders, you would expect that you would have some sort of place for the imagination to play out. The dungeon master does actually have something like this. He has to sort of plan out in advance what's in those spaces. Almost always, even though they say that there's no board in this board game, there really is, kind of. Your dungeon master has to create a map. It might be something as simple as a piece of paper with some boxes on it and some tubes on it, or it could be a whole lot more complex than that. But if you want a pickup game, you need to find yourself somebody who's willing to put a map out into reality, or at least his reality, and have you go through it like a gerbil going through those weird box mazes we used to make as kids. Now this is, don't get me wrong, this is a very, very simple game of Dungeons and Dragons. Very simple. Usually games involve a lot more tactics and strategy, which is another interesting dimension, or stage if you will. Even though some games aren't sure on this next one, a lot of them involve role-playing. Even though it's obviously called a role-playing game, the actual capacity for many of your fellow players to do weird voices and act out somebody's feelings, yeah, it's going to be touch and go on that one. So that dimension is not required, even though it's on the tin. Do you see what I mean? This is it. So let me sum up before I go on to the next video. If you want to try a pickup game of Dungeons and Dragons, that's easy. You take your ball and you roll it and you add your skill and your ability, if either of them apply. Sometimes you can even add some magic. We'll get into that in another video. And that's it. You're off and playing. For the referee, he's going to want to make a bunch of boxes with things in them for players to roll dice at. Now those things could be monsters, traps, puzzles. They could be a jungle gym in the form of a cliff face. This is the reason you go adventuring. You get to try all those things out in life, and the stakes tend to be injury or death. There's a sharp contrast between G.I. Joe and Barbie. Dungeons and Dragons is much more in the G.I. Joe direction. I hope that's everything. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can make a map in seconds. So your referee or dungeon master can make a dungeon in seconds. It's really not hard. If you don't trust me, let me be honest with you. You can trust me on this. I've done this for decades. It's something you can do in seconds. Let's give it a shot.